Good morning. You remember little Johnny, don't you? That little rascal, always looking for ways to create mischief. And of course, his favorite target of all of his mischief was his sister Susie. Oh, he loved to torture her. But he had a brilliant idea one day. He realized across the road at the farm, there was a whole lot of excess manure. And he decided he was going to really play a joke on his sister. So he spent the whole afternoon hauling manure from across the road and filling up her sandbox. Well, she was off doing other things that day and didn't get home till late that night. And little Johnny could hardly wait for the next morning when she discovered what he had done. Well, she got up the next morning and went in the kitchen and had breakfast and went out into the yard heading for her sandbox and stopped. She was shocked. She had no idea that things had been happening while she was gone. And as she took in the scene in front of her, her sandbox filled with manure, she let out a squeal and ran and jumped into it and started flinging it all around. Well, Johnny was baffled. He said, what's with you and all this manure? Aren't you upset? She said, oh no. He said, aren't you angry? Oh, she said, oh no, not possible. How can I be angry? You see, with all this manure, somewhere in here there's got to be a pony. Ever have moments in your life where it seems like your sandbox has been filled with manure? That's what we've been exploring in recent weeks, looking at those times of change and transition, when things happen in our life that we wouldn't necessarily welcome, and trying to figure out how can we handle those times of change from a higher, more spiritually inspired perspective. And we've been looking periodically through this series at the story of the children of Israel, how they were in captivity in Egypt, but they eventually left Egypt and wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. That just boggles my mind. 40 years to make a 2-week trip. Even in that day and time, it wouldn't have been nearly that complicated, but as metaphysicians, we know that that number 40 tells us something was going on spiritually. 40 is the number of, that basically kind of translates into, it takes however long it takes. And when we're going through changes in life, those changes, our process, what goes on, that moves us from where we were to where we're going, it's a process that will take as long as it takes. And that will be unique and different for everyone. Now, the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness, and there's some marvelous stories that we'll explore in other Sunday lessons because the metaphysical insights are fascinating. But in that time of wandering in the wilderness, some really important transformational things went on with them. They coalesced as a people. They became a nation through their shared struggle, through their shared journey. They connected in a way that they never had in their time in Egypt. In that time of wandering in the wilderness, they learned a powerful lesson about Yahweh, God, their source. They learned every time they turned to Yahweh for whatever it was they needed, their need was met. And in a very literal sense, they became together one nation under God. Through all the various lessons and experiences they had wandering in the wilderness, they were no longer the same people who left Egypt. They had gone through transition and transformation, changed at the very depth of their being as they wandered in the wilderness or moved through this time of change and void. Now, change can be fun. I know a lot of us have embraced change in different shapes and forms as it's come into our life because it's what we've wanted. The changes we struggle with so much are those that come upon us that are not the changes that we would personally select. Often in those moments when that change comes, the cry is, oh, life will never be the same again. And that's true. When the job goes away, when the marriage ends, when the friendship departs, when we move from one part of the country to the other, whatever the change is, the fact is life will never be the same. Which is not to say that life can never again be good or fulfilling and rich and wonderful. What makes the difference is what we learn through the process. As we dig through the manure of that change, are we going to discover the gift? Are we going to find the pony that's waiting for us? I'm going to share a story this morning that is deeply personal about a time of change that Lee and I would never, ever have consciously invited into our lives. When Lee and I met, he had a son. Jason was about 19 when we met. Lee'd been a single dad to Jason from the time Jason was about 6. And when I met Jason, I met a sweet, gentle, somewhat vulnerable, not really clearly directed young man, and I thought, well, he's 19, it'll come. But over the next couple of years, we saw some changes in him that were not only disconcerting, they became alarming. And what we ultimately realized is Jason was developing a horrific illness called schizoaffective disorder. Things, as his brain developed at that stage of his life, were not developing correctly. Some of the neurological connections were not connecting ideally. And the result was this horrific, horrific illness. He heard voices that were always critical and condemning to him. He had a lot of confusion about just the daily things in life. Some days just to get out of bed and get his socks on was more than he could handle. Well, once we realized that things with Jason were quite awry, we sought out medical attention. My thought, being very naive at that point about his illness, was, well, the docs will give him a medication and things will get back to normal. Boy, was that misguided. We learned with Jason over the following months that medication helped, but his illness demanded a lot more attention and he demanded a lot more care. So we spent a great deal of our time and focus trying to keep him on track, trying to help him navigate life, where to him even the simplest things were momentous mountains that he struggled to climb. When he was 22, just a few months after his initial diagnosis, he decided to go to Montana to visit his mother. We got a call about 5 weeks later telling us that Jason was dead. 22 years old, he had ended his life by his own hand because of the ravages of this disease and feeling so overwhelmed and so incapable of dealing with even the simplest things in life. Yeah, it's one of those changes in life that you sure don't want, but you have to deal with it anyway. But we were shocked, we were horrified. We went to Montana to say our final farewell to Jason. It was a really tough time for a long time. But some fascinating things came out of that time as we ended the relationship with Jason that we had once had, and as we struggled through the void, as we entered the wilderness and slogged through it as best we could. One of the things that came up is we were gone for about a week. And when we came back, when I went back to work, I was just floored to discover things had gone on as they always did. Our life was shattered. Our world was falling apart. But the rest of the world went on, seemingly oblivious to what we were experiencing. And then I started to notice that despite our shock and pain, the sun still rose, the flowers still bloomed, life continued to happen. And while part of that was upsetting to me because I thought the whole world should stop because we were hurting, it was also reassuring. It was a reminder that we were part of a bigger picture, and that the divine, and that expression of the divine in this earthly material experience was still present. Life does go on, no matter how welcome the shock can be. We wandered in the wilderness for many months. It was not a joyful time in our life. But we found inner reserves, inner resources, inner insight that we never suspected we had. You know, the title of this whole series is Finding Yourself in Transition. And it's not just about, well, what do I do when I find myself in a time of transition? It is about finding ourselves, finding who we are and what we're about as a result of this time of transition. As we wandered in the wilderness, slowly but surely some insights bubbled up. I have to be honest and tell you, I don't think we recognized them as insights or gifts at the time. It's much easier to see looking back. But from our experience with Jason and his illness and his death, we garnered a much greater, broader, more in-depth understanding of mental illness and what that could be all about, and ways to encourage and support people dealing with mental illness, whether it's their own or that of someone they love. Lee and I knew when we met and married 21 years ago that we were together for more than just Lee and Laurie. We didn't know what that was, we didn't know what it looked like, but we just had a sense that our being together was more than just about a man and a woman. And as we went through this time in the wilderness, dealing with the loss of Jason and educating ourselves more about mental illness, and from where we were at, reaching out to other families dealing with similar challenges, it became abundantly clear that we were together to bring, in our way, healing and understanding to others struggling with the mental illness of a loved one. We developed a much deeper level of compassion and insight to people who appeared different than we ever had before. We were out bumming around one day in a small town, and there was a fellow walking down the street that, well, draw your image of a homeless man in your mind, and that's what we saw. This person was ragged and disheveled and appeared very confused. And in days past, I would have just kind of walked away, crossing on the other side of the street, because I didn't know how to deal with this person. Well, now we had an understanding that this man, for all of his exterior unpleasantness, was still a child of God and still deserving of love and respect. And Lee boldly walked up to him and shook his hand and started a conversation with him. That's something we never would have done before. until our eyes were opened by our own experience. Life after Jason's death has never been the same. We've grown. We've become more in so many ways. It's not the same, but it is still good, just in ways we'd never expected. And looking back over the years and through the process we've gone, I've realized, this is the transformation that happens when we're wandering in the wilderness. And as we work through that, as we move through that, as we take it in and grow from it, that's when we approach the promised land. We have to remember that it's always a process, wandering in the wilderness, saying goodbye to what was, being in this time of unknowing and change and transformation, and then moving toward what is becoming. You know, it's kind of a one step forward, two steps back process. But you can get through it that way. You learn and grow. It's also a process that cannot be pushed. You know, if you try and hurry up and get through what doesn't feel good, you push away your own opportunity to learn and become the more that you were created to be. We can be ready for newness in our life, but not anxious about it. We do need to be alert. And above all, we need to continue to do what we did a few minutes ago, to be still and know the divine within us and all around us, to know that we are loved and supported, no matter how messy and uncomfortable life has become. We are never, ever alone. All we have to do is open our eyes and our hearts to that greater spiritual truth. How do you know when you're entering the promised land? There's a sense of readiness. There's this subtle inner shift where somehow on some deep level you realize, oh, I've gone through the ending, wandered through the wilderness, and now I'm starting to break through to something more, something different, something better, if I choose to make it that way. Sometimes dreams will help you know when you've entered the promised land. Dreams of a birth, dreams about marriage or new relationships, maybe a dream about now all of a sudden you're living in a new house. Those all are our subconscious mind, our God mind, if you will, saying, pay attention, we are moving to a new place in life. What is the promised land? Oh, it's no place you'll ever find on a map. It has nothing to do with geography. The promised land is you and your life in a renewed and richer expression that empowers you to be so much more than you have ever been before. And as a result of that, you are blessed, and the world is blessed. It's scary, it's daunting, it's upsetting when what was falls away. Mindfully acknowledging what was actually frees us to move forward in life. Wandering through the wilderness, doing what we need to do, but being open to divine guidance will eventually, but inevitably, lead us to the promised land of a fuller, richer, and more meaningful life. And along the way, every single step of the way, every moment of the day, the divine intelligence that created this magnificent universe is always, always with us. So let's take a moment and revisit our affirmation for the day as we know these spiritual insights on a deeper level. Even as times of challenge and change rock my world, I know I am never alone. Divinely guided at all times, I become more of all that I was created to be. And so it is.